Ambassador Jiwoo felt her world crashing down as she stared at the floating hologram in front of her. The words seemed to burn into her mind like acid. After 3 decades of serving these alien overlords, after watching Earth send its best soldiers to die in their wars, after giving up humanity's most precious resources to feed their endless hunger for power, this was how they repaid them. The crystalline chamber around her pulsed with an eerie blue light. Hundreds of alien representatives sat in their floating pods, their strange forms casting twisted shadows on the walls. Some had tentacles instead of arms, others breathed methane through gill slits, and a few looked like walking nightmares with too many teeth and eyes. But they all shared one thing in common, the cold, calculating look of predators who had just cornered their prey. 30 years, Jiwoo whispered to herself, her Korean accent thick with emotion. 30 years we served you faithfully. The massive Vorthak delegate loomed over the assembly like a walking skyscraper. Its 6 spider-like legs clicked against the floor as it moved, and its cluster of compound eyes reflected the chamber's light like black diamonds. When it spoke, its voice rumbled through hidden speakers, making the very air vibrate. Your species has shown remarkable potential as warriors, the creature admitted, its mandibles clicking together. Your soldiers fight with a ferocity that even surprises us, but that same violence makes you unsuitable for peaceful coexistence. Jiwoo's hands clenched into fists. She remembered the reports from the Outer Rim Wars, where human marines had held impossible positions against the insectoid Hraktar swarms. She remembered Admiral Park Dong-hyun, who had sacrificed his entire fleet to save a Keltharian colony world. She remembered the thousands of young men and women who had left Earth as heroes and returned as coffins, draped in the Galactic Alliance flag. "And we fought your wars," she said, her voice growing stronger. "We bled for worlds we'd never even seen. We saved species that now sit in judgment of us." The serpentine Keltharian delegate slithered forward, its scales shimmering like oil on water. Unlike the Vorthak, it moved with fluid grace, every motion calculated and precise. Its eyes were ancient, holding the wisdom and cruelty of a species that had mastered interstellar politics long before humans discovered fire. "Yes, you fought well," it hissed, forked tongue tasting the air. "Perhaps too well. Your Captain Lee Min-ho single-handedly destroyed a Hraktar hive ship. Your commander Kim So-jin developed tactics that turned the tide of 3 major battles. Your people learn too quickly, adapt too fast. You make us uncomfortable." Jiwoo felt a chill run down her spine. She had known Min-ho personally, a quiet man from Busan who loved his daughter more than life itself. So-jin had been her roommate at the academy, a brilliant strategist who could see patterns where others saw only chaos. They weren't monsters. They were heroes who had saved countless lives. "Uncomfortable," Jiwoo's voice rose, "because we're effective, because we actually care about protecting innocent lives." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien sounds, clicking, hissing, growling, and frequencies that human ears couldn't properly process. Some delegates seemed amused, others appeared agitated. The Vorthak raised one of its massive claws, and silence fell like a hammer blow. "The decision is final," it announced. "Earth has 12 standard months to evacuate its population. The Galactic Transportation Guild will provide vessels capable of relocating 100 million individuals to designated colony worlds." The number hit Jiwoo like a physical blow. Earth's population had just passed 12 billion. The aliens were essentially signing a death warrant for 92% of humanity. "You're talking about genocide," she whispered, then louder. "You're talking about the systematic extermination of my entire species." A new voice entered the conversation, smooth, almost hypnotic. The Morvani representative stepped into the light and Jiwoo had to suppress a shudder. Of all the alien species in the galaxy, the Morvani were the most unsettling. They looked almost human, but wrong in subtle ways. Their proportions were slightly off, their movements too fluid, their smiles too wide. They were beautiful in the way that poisonous flowers were beautiful, attractive right up until they killed you. "Not extermination," the Morvani said, its voice like honey over broken glass. "Relocation. The remaining population will be absorbed." into the galactic ecosystem naturally. Jiwoo knew what that meant: slavery, experimentation, or simply being left to die on a barren world. The Morvani were masters of making genocide sound like charity. As the session ended and the alien delegates began filing out, Jiwoo remained frozen in her seat. Around her, the crystalline chamber's lights dimmed, leaving her in semi-darkness. She thought about Earth, the blue marble that had birthed humanity and sent them to the stars. She thought about her parents' graves in Seoul, her brother's children who would never see their 10th birthday, the billions of people who had no idea their world had just been condemned. That night, alone in her quarters aboard the diplomatic station, Jiwoo accessed the restricted council databases. Her clearance level was high, a privilege earned through years of faithful service that now felt like bitter irony. What she found in those classified files made her blood run cold. The Morvani Syndicate had been planning this for decades. Earth's location in the outer spiral arm made it a perfect staging ground for expansion into unexplored regions. More importantly, deep beneath Earth's crust lay deposits of quantum crystals, the same crystals that powered faster-than-light travel and galactic communication networks. Humanity had been living on top of the galaxy's most valuable resource, without even knowing. The evacuation wasn't mercy. It was eviction. Jiwoo's fingers flew over the holographic interface as she prepared an encrypted message burst to Earth. She had maybe hours before her activities were discovered, maybe less. As she worked, tears ran down her cheeks, not just for her own fate, but for the terrible knowledge that the galaxy they had served so faithfully had never seen them as anything more than useful animals. But as she finished encoding the message, a fierce determination filled her heart. Humanity had surprised the galaxy before with their resilience and ingenuity. Perhaps they could do it again. Perhaps this betrayal would awaken something in her species that their alien overlords would come to regret. The message launched into hyperspace, carrying Earth's final warning across the void. The countdown to extinction had begun, but Jiwoo suspected that the galaxy had no idea what kind of enemy they had just created. The holographic message from Ambassador Jiwoo flickered to life in the center of Seoul's Global Defense Center, her face pale and streaked with tears. President Minho watched in stunned silence as she delivered humanity's death sentence. Around the massive circular table, world leaders from every continent sat frozen, their faces reflecting the same mixture of disbelief and growing rage. 12 billion people, whispered Prime Minister Chen from the European Federation, her voice barely audible. How do we choose who lives and who dies? President Minho's knuckles went white as he gripped the edge of the holotable. The rotating projection of Earth seemed to mock them, their beautiful blue world, home to every human who had ever lived, now condemned by alien judges who saw them as nothing more than dangerous animals to be put down. 100 million, he repeated, his voice thick with barely contained emotion. They're offering to save less than 1% of our people and calling it mercy. General Hyejin stood up so abruptly that her chair toppled backward. The decorated soldier's face was a mask of controlled fury, her hands trembling with the effort of restraining herself. She had fought in the Outer Rim Wars, had seen good soldiers die protecting alien worlds that apparently meant nothing to their so-called allies. 30 years of service, she growled, pacing like a caged tiger. 30 years of sending our best and brightest to die in their wars. My own son gave his life defending a Keltharian colony, and this is how they repay us. The room erupted in angry voices as the full implications hit home. The Russian premier was shouting about betrayal, the African Union representative was demanding immediate military action, and the Brazilian chancellor was already calculating evacuation logistics. The noise grew louder and more chaotic, until it seemed like the very walls might crack under the pressure. In the corner of the room, away from the political storm, Dr. Taemin remained perfectly still. His weathered face, marked by years of working under harsh suns on archaeological sites across the globe, showed none of the panic that gripped the others. Instead, he stared intently at his tablet, scrolling through images and data that had been puzzling him for months. The structures his team had discovered beneath the Pacific Ocean were unlike anything in the archaeological record. They predated human civilization by millions of years, yet their design felt strangely familiar. The mathematics carved into their walls used concepts that human scientists had only recently discovered. The energy patterns etched into crystalline surfaces matched theoretical models that shouldn't have existed until the 21st century. "Sir," Tamin called out, his quiet voice somehow cutting through the chaos. The room gradually fell silent as all eyes turned to the elderly scientist. "I believe there's something the Galactic Council isn't telling us about Earth's history, President." Minho gestured for him to continue, grateful for any distraction from the impossible mathematics of genocide. Tamin activated his tablet's projection system, filling the air above the table with three-dimensional images of the underwater ruins. These structures were discovered 6 months ago by a deep-sea mining operation in the Mariana Trench, he explained, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. Initial dating suggested they were geological formations, but closer examination revealed something extraordinary. The hologram shifted, showing detailed scans of corridors and chambers that stretched for kilometers beneath the ocean floor. The architecture was elegant and purposeful, clearly the work of an advanced civilization. But what caught everyone's attention were the symbols carved into every surface, intricate patterns that seemed to dance in the light. "The language," Tamin continued, zooming in on a section of wall covered in flowing script. "Our linguists have been working around the clock to decode it. The strange thing is, it feels familiar, not like learning a foreign language, but like remembering something you once knew." Dr. Sarah Kim, the team's lead linguist, had described it as the most unsettling experience of her career. The symbols seemed to whisper their meanings directly into her mind, bypassing the normal process of translation entirely. Her dreams had become filled with visions of vast cities beneath impossible skies, of beings who looked almost human, but moved with a grace that suggested something far more advanced. "What are you suggesting?" asked General He-Jin, leaning forward with sudden interest. "I'm suggesting that humanity's presence on Earth might not be as straightforward as we've always believed," Tamin replied carefully. "These ruins contain technology that surpasses anything the current galactic powers possess. The energy signatures we're detecting shouldn't be possible with known physics." Meanwhile, 300 kilometers above their heads, Admiral So-young floated in the command center of Orbital Station Sejong. The facility officially served as Earth's primary space traffic control hub, monitoring the thousands of ships that passed through the solar system daily. Unofficially, it was the nerve center of humanity's most carefully guarded secret. So-young's fingers danced across a control panel that didn't appear on any official schematic. Hidden throughout the asteroid belt, concealed within seemingly ordinary mining platforms and research stations, were shipyards that had been operating in absolute secrecy for over a decade. The Galactic Council believed humans were bound by the treaties they had signed, treaties that limited Earth's military capabilities and prevented the development of certain technologies. They were wrong. "Admiral," reported Captain Jung-soo from his position at the communications console. "All facilities are reporting green status. The Incheon yards have completed their first heavy cruiser, and the Busan facility is ahead of schedule on the new fighter designs." So-young nodded grimly. When she had first proposed the secret shipbuilding program to the previous administration, it had been considered a paranoid precaution. Earth's leaders had trusted their alien allies, believed in the promises of mutual cooperation and shared prosperity. But So-young had lived through the border wars, had seen how quickly galactic politics could shift. She had prepared for the day when humanity might stand alone. That day had arrived sooner than even she had expected. "Begin Phase 2. Activation," she ordered. "All crews to combat readiness. If the galaxy wants to judge us as warriors, then by God we'll show them what human warriors can really do." Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, the ancient ruins pulsed with a soft light that had been dormant for millions of years. Dr. Tamin's excavation had done more than uncover artifacts. It had awakened something that had been waiting patiently for the right moment to emerge. As humanity faced its greatest crisis, forces beyond their understanding were beginning to stir. The countdown to extinction had begun, But the galaxy was about to learn that humanity had never been alone on Earth. And the true owners of the planet were finally ready to reclaim what was theirs. In the hidden shipyards scattered throughout the solar system, massive vessels began moving for the first time. Their hulls gleamed with metal alloys that shouldn't have existed, powered by engines that operated on principles the Galactic Council had never seen. Humanity's secret fleet was awakening, and with it, the galaxy's worst nightmare was about to become reality. The war for Earth's survival was about to begin, and the aliens who had condemned humanity to extinction were going to discover that they had made a terrible mistake. The streets of Seoul burned with the fury of 12 billion condemned souls. Smoke rose from overturned cars and shattered storefronts as crowds surged through the city like a human tsunami. The lottery results had been announced that morning, random numbers that would decide who lived and who died. Families gathered around their screens, watching in horror as their fate was determined by algorithms designed by their alien executioners. In the Gangnam district, a mother clutched her 3 children as protesters clashed with riot police. Her eldest son, barely 16, had been selected for evacuation. Her 2 younger daughters had not. The choice was impossible: abandon 2 children to save one, or stay and watch all 3 die when the aliens came to sterilize the planet. "This is madness," screamed a man whose wife had been chosen but whose elderly parents were left behind. "How can we choose? How can anyone make this choice?" Similar scenes played out across the globe. In New York, London, Tokyo, and Mumbai, millions of people faced the same nightmare. The selection process was supposed to be fair, random, but fairness meant nothing when it condemned billions to death. Governments struggled to maintain order as their own citizens turned against each other in desperation. 3 kilometers beneath, the Pacific Ocean, Dr. Taemin's team worked in conditions that would have killed them without their advanced life support systems. The pressure at this depth could crush a human body in microseconds, but the ancient ruins seemed to exist in their own pocket of stable environment. The water around the structures remained perfectly clear, as if held back by invisible barriers. "The energy readings are off the charts," reported Dr. Min Jung, the team's lead engineer. Her hands shook as she adjusted the scanning equipment. Whatever's powering these structures has been running continuously for millions of years without any apparent fuel source. Young-soo, the genetic specialist, hunched over his portable laboratory setup. His latest analysis had revealed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about human evolution. The DNA samples taken from the ruins contained markers that matched human genetic code with impossible precision. "Dr. Taemin," he called out, his voice barely steady, "you need to see this. The crystalline structures aren't just responding to our presence. They're actively scanning us. And the results?" He paused, double-checking his data. "It's like they're recognizing us, like they've been waiting for us." The breakthrough came when Min Jung was examining a section of wall covered in intricate crystal formations. The structures pulsed with a soft blue light that seemed to follow her movements. As she leaned closer to take detailed measurements, one of the crystals extended outward like a living thing, its razor-sharp edge slicing through her protective glove and into her palm. "Damn it," she cursed, pulling her hand back. Drops of bright red blood splattered onto the crystal surface, and immediately the entire chamber exploded into brilliant light. The team dove for cover as energy cascaded through the ruins like liquid lightning. Every surface began to glow, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with power. But instead of the destruction they expected, something miraculous happened. The walls around them became transparent, revealing vast chambers extending in all directions. And in the center of it all, holographic displays materialized from nothing. "Dear God," whispered Taemin, staring at images that defied belief. The holograms showed a galaxy teeming with life, but not the galaxy they knew. This was an older universe, one where majestic cities floated among the stars, and beings of incredible beauty and power moved between worlds as easily as walking from room to room. The display focused on a species that made the team's hearts stop. They looked human, but elevated somehow, taller, more graceful, with eyes that held the wisdom of ages. These beings, labeled in the holographic text as the Forerunners, were clearly the architects of the galactic civilization they were witnessing. "We're so not from Earth," Tamin breathed, his scientific mind struggling to process the implications. "Humanity was placed here. We're not just random evolution. We're descendants of the Forerunners, the original architects of galactic civilization." The holographic record continued, showing the rise and fall of the Forerunner Empire. They had seeded life throughout the galaxy, created the hyperspace lanes that connected distant worlds, and built the technology that still powered galactic civilization today. But something had happened, a great catastrophe that scattered the Forerunners across the universe and left their descendants sleeping on distant worlds. Earth, the display revealed, had been one of many sanctuary worlds where Forerunner survivors had been placed in deep genetic dormancy. The plan was simple. When the time was right, when the galaxy needed them again, the descendants would awaken and reclaim their birthright. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, Ambassador Jiwoo had discovered allies in the most unlikely places. The diplomatic station where she was being held was a melting pot of alien species, many of whom had their own reasons to hate the current galactic order. Kethvar was a Keltharian rebel whose scales had been scarred by years of torture in Morvani prison camps. Unlike the Serpentine delegates who served the Syndicate, Kethvar represented the enslaved masses of his people, who had been subjugated for centuries. "Your species isn't the first to threaten them," he hissed, his forked tongue tasting the air, nervously. "The Morvani have built their empire on the graves of older civilizations, but there's something different about humanity, something that terrifies them." He led Jiwoo through hidden passages in the station, past areas where the oppressed species gathered in secret. She saw Vorthak workers, whose compound eyes held the pain of genocide, their once mighty civilization reduced to a few million survivors who served as laborers for their conquerors. She met Zephyrian merchants, whose crystalline bodies had been dimmed by centuries of economic exploitation. "The current powers aren't the original galactic civilization," Kethvar explained, as they descended into the station's forgotten depths. "They're scavengers who built their empires on the ruins of something far greater, the Forerunners." Jiwoo's breath caught. The name was familiar somehow, like a half-remembered dream. "They've been suppressing Forerunner sites across the galaxy for millennia," Kethvar continued. "Destroying artifacts, eliminating anyone who gets too close to the truth, but they can't destroy everything. And now that humanity is awakening..." He gestured to a hidden chamber where rebel scientists had been studying Forerunner technology. The artifacts were beautiful beyond description, crystalline structures that pulsed with inner light, metal alloys that seemed to shift and flow, like liquid, and devices whose purpose was beyond current understanding. "If humanity truly are Forerunner descendants," Kethvar said, his eyes gleaming with hope, "then you're not just another species to be exterminated. You're the rightful heirs to galactic civilization, and that changes everything." Back on Earth, the riots continued to rage, but deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, something was stirring. The ancient ruins had fully awakened, their power coursing through hidden networks that connected to similar sites across the planet. In the Amazon rainforest, beneath the Sahara Desert, under the ice of Antarctica, Forerunner installations that had slept for millions of years were coming online. Dr. Tamin's team watched in awe as the holographic displays showed the extent of the network. Earth wasn't just a random world, it was a command center, a nexus point designed to coordinate the awakening of Forerunner descendants across the galaxy. The countdown to extinction continued, but humanity was no longer alone. The galaxy's greatest secret was about to be revealed, and the aliens who had condemned them to death were going to learn that they had just awakened their own worst nightmare. The real war was about to begin, and this time, humanity would not be fighting as outcasts begging for mercy. They would be fighting as the rightful rulers of the galaxy, reclaiming what had always been theirs. The transformation began quietly, almost unnoticed amid the chaos of global panic. In research facilities across Earth, human scientists who had struggled with complex problems for years suddenly found solutions flowing through their minds like water. Dr. Park Jin-woo, a quantum physicist in Seoul, stared at equations that had appeared in his notebook, equations he didn't remember writing yet understood perfectly. The mathematics described energy manipulation techniques that could revolutionize space travel. In military academies worldwide, strategy instructors found their students predicting battle outcomes with frightening accuracy. Lieutenant Kim Soo-jin, fresh from the academy, was analyzing Morvani fleet movements on her training simulator when she suddenly saw patterns that shouldn't have been visible. She could predict where enemy ships would be hours before they arrived, as if she was reading their commanders' minds. The genetic awakening spread like wildfire through the human population. Construction workers were suddenly designing buildings with impossible structural integrity. Farmers were growing crops that shouldn't have survived in their climate zones. Children were solving mathematical problems that would challenge university professors. Humanity was remembering skills it had never learned. High above Earth's atmosphere, Admiral So-young watched her secret fleet emerge from the asteroid belt with a mixture of pride and amazement. The ships that had been built in hidden yards throughout the solar system were no longer just human engineering. They had transformed into something far more advanced. The Forerunner Awakening had activated technologies embedded in their very design, turning them into vessels that belonged in legends rather than reality. The flagship Soul Defender stretched over 2 kilometers in length, its hull composed of a metal that seemed to shift between silver and gold in the starlight. Weapon arrays along its flanks charged with energy that created ripples in space itself. The smaller frigates and destroyers moved with the fluid grace of living creatures, their engines producing no visible exhaust, yet propelling them at speeds that should have been impossible. "Admiral," reported Captain Lee Dong-hwan from the Seoul Defender's Bridge. "All systems are operating at efficiency levels we've never seen before. The ships are practically flying themselves." So-young nodded grimly. She could feel it too, a connection to her vessel that went beyond normal command protocols. It was as if the ship was responding to her thoughts, anticipating her orders before she gave them. Around her, crew members moved with enhanced coordination, their reflexes sharpened to superhuman levels. "Open all channels," she commanded. "Let the galaxy hear us." Her voice transmitted across every frequency used by galactic civilization, reaching from the core worlds to the outer rim territories. On alien worlds, in space stations, aboard warships preparing for humanity's destruction, every being with a communication device heard the same message. "This is Admiral So-young of Earth Defense Command." Her voice rang clear and strong. "You wanted to evacuate us? You called us a biological hazard? You condemned 12 billion innocent people to death?" She paused, letting the words sink in. "Come and try to take our world. We'll show you what real hazards look like." The first Morvani task force arrived 3 days later, confident in their technological superiority. Their ships were sleek predators of space, armed with weapons that had conquered dozens of worlds. The task force commander, a Morvani general named Yithkol, expected to find a primitive world defended by desperate humans using stolen alien technology. Instead, his sensors detected something impossible. Earth's orbital space was filled with defensive platforms that hadn't existed in any intelligence reports. Massive satellite networks hung in perfect geometric patterns, their surfaces crackling with energy that made his tactical officers nervous. And emerging from behind the moon came a human fleet that defied everything he knew about Earth's capabilities. "Impossible," Yithkol hissed, his perfectly humanoid features twisting with confusion. "Our intelligence showed they had maybe a dozen outdated cruisers. This fleet could challenge a sector command." His weapons officer, a nervous Morvani lieutenant, studied the energy readings with growing alarm. "Sir, their power signatures are off the charts. Whatever they're using for weapons, it's not standard galactic technology." The human fleet moved with coordinated precision that spoke of centuries of tactical experience. The Soul Defender led the formation, flanked by smaller vessels that danced through space like schools of fish. When the humans opened fire, the Morvani discovered that their shields, which had protected them against every known weapon in the galaxy, were utterly useless. Beams of pure energy tore through Morvani hulls like they were made of paper. The humans' projectile weapons fired crystalline slugs that somehow ignored defensive barriers entirely. Within minutes, half of Yithkal's task force was either destroyed or crippled. "Retreat!" he screamed, but it was too late. Human ships were already surrounding his flagship, their weapons locked onto his engines. The humans weren't just defending, they were demonstrating their superiority with surgical precision. On Earth's surface, General Hai-Jin prepared for a different kind of battle. Intelligence reports indicated that Vorthak shock troops were planning ground assaults on major population centers. The spider-like aliens were legendary warriors, their six-limbed combat forms and natural armor making them nearly unstoppable in close quarters fighting. Hai-Jin's soldiers wore armor that looked almost organic, its surface shifting and adapting to changing conditions. The technology had appeared overnight in human military facilities, as if the suits had been waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. When worn by awakened humans, the armor enhanced their natural abilities to impossible levels. The first Vorthak drop pods screamed through Earth's atmosphere like meteors, their occupants eager for the slaughter they expected to find. Instead, they encountered human soldiers who moved like ghosts through urban environments, appearing and disappearing with techniques that seemed supernatural. Sergeant Park Young-min found himself facing a Vorthak warrior in the ruins of downtown. Seoul. The alien creature towered over him, its compound eyes tracking his movement while razor-sharp claws extended from its hands. In normal circumstances, a human would have been torn apart in seconds, but Young-min wasn't normal anymore. The armor enhanced his reflexes until he could see the alien's attacks coming before they began. His weapon, a rifle that fired bursts of concentrated energy, punched through the Vorthak's natural armor like it wasn't there. When the creature lunged at him with impossible speed, Young-min simply wasn't there anymore, having moved to a new position faster than the alien could. Track. The battle lasted less than 5 minutes. When it was over, the Vorthak invasion force had been completely destroyed. Their supposedly invincible warriors defeated by humans they had dismissed as primitive animals. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, Dr. Taemin watched as Forerunner sights across the galaxy began responding to Earth's awakening. The holographic displays showed activation signatures from hundreds of worlds, each one representing another population of dormant descendants beginning to remember who they truly were. "We are not just descended from the Forerunners," he whispered, the full truth finally becoming clear. "We are the Forerunners, all of us. Every human who ever lived was part of an ancient plan to preserve our civilization until the galaxy was ready for our return." The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't been placed on Earth as refugees or survivors. They had been strategically positioned as sleeper agents in their own galactic reconquest. The current alien powers had built their civilizations on Forerunner ruins, never realizing that the rightful owners were still alive, just waiting for the right moment to reclaim what was theirs. As the news of humanity's victories spread across the galaxy, other oppressed species began to hope. The Keltharian rebels saw an opportunity for freedom. The surviving Vorthak realized they might have a chance for revenge against their oppressors. The enslaved populations of 1,000 worlds looked to Earth and saw liberation. The galaxy would never be the same. The Forerunners had returned, and they were not in a forgiving mood. The collapse of galactic civilization began with a single pulse of energy that originated from Earth and spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. On thousands of worlds, ancient ruins that had been dismissed as primitive monuments suddenly blazed to life. The Forerunner network was awakening after millions of years of dormancy, and with it came the truth that would shatter everything the galaxy thought it knew. On the Morvani homeworld of Morthak, Emperor Vexthul watched in horror as his greatest palace crumbled around him. The magnificent structures his ancestors had claimed to build were revealing their true nature, Forerunner architecture that had been painted over and modified to hide its origins. As the ancient systems reactivated, the lies of millennia were exposed in blazing holographic displays that showed the real history of the galaxy. "This is impossible," the Emperor snarled, his perfect humanoid features twisted with rage and fear. "We are the rightful rulers of this galaxy. We built this civilization from nothing." But the holographic records told a different story. They showed Morvani ancestors as scavengers, who had found Forerunner ruins and claimed them as their own. They showed the systematic genocide of awakening Forerunner descendants throughout history, the suppression of ancient knowledge, and the deliberate corruption of galactic civilization into a system of oppression and slavery. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. On Vorth Prime, the few remaining Vorthak elders wept as they remembered their true past, not as the savage warriors they had been portrayed as, but as the guardians and protectors of Forerunner knowledge. Their species had been nearly extinct when the current powers found them, and they had been manipulated into serving as enforcers for a system that had destroyed their own ancestors. The Keltharian homeworld of Sethka witnessed mass uprisings, as the enslaved populations learned that their primitive ancestors had actually been advanced beings with their own rich culture. The serpentine slaves who had been treated as animals suddenly found themselves accessing genetic memories of a time when their people had been scholars and artists, not property. President Minho stood in the center of what had once been called the Galactic Council Chamber, but was now revealed as the Grand Assembly of the Forerunner Republic. The massive space had transformed completely. Walls that had appeared to be simple metal now showed their true crystalline nature, pulsing with patterns of light that carried the accumulated knowledge of millions of years. Representatives from across the galaxy filled the chamber, but they were no longer the same beings who had condemned humanity to death just months earlier. Many were former slaves and oppressed peoples who had thrown off their chains. Others were members of the old ruling class who had chosen to stand with truth rather than maintain their power through lies. "You declared us a contamination," Minho said, his voice amplified by Forerunner technology that carried his words to every corner of the galaxy. "You were right to fear us, not because we're violent, but because we remember. We remember what this galaxy was supposed to be." He gestured to the holographic displays that surrounded him, showing images of the ancient Forerunner civilization at its height, cities that floated among the stars, connected by transportation networks that could move beings from one end of the galaxy to the other in moments. Worlds transformed into gardens where every species could thrive according to their nature. A society built on cooperation rather than domination. "You built your empires on the graves of our children," Minho continued, his voice growing stronger. "You turned our technology into weapons of oppression. You corrupted our vision of unity into systems of slavery. But the truth has a way of surviving, even when you try to bury it beneath lies." Admiral So Young's liberation fleets had spread across the galaxy like a wave of freedom. Her ships, now fully transformed by awakened Forerunner technology, moved through space with capabilities that made the old galactic navies look like toys. But they weren't weapons of conquest. They were instruments of liberation. On the mining world of Zerion 7, millions of enslaved beings watched in amazement as human marines in gleaming armor cut through their chains and destroyed the facilities that had kept them in bondage. The humans fought with precision and purpose, but also with mercy, capturing rather than killing their enemies whenever possible. Captain Kim Jung-soo led one such liberation mission on the agricultural world of Bentha, where entire populations had been turned into biological farming equipment. His team moved through the slave compounds like angels of salvation, their advanced medical equipment healing injuries that had been considered permanent. "We're not here to rule you," Jung-soo explained to a group of freed Benthari farmers whose scales had been scarred by years of brutal labor. "We're here to help you remember who you were meant to be." The truly extraordinary discovery came when Dr. Taemin's research teams began working with alien scientists to fully map the Forerunner network. What they found was that nearly every sapient species in the galaxy carried dormant Forerunner genetic markers. Humanity hadn't been the only descendants, they had simply been the first to fully awaken. "The Forerunners didn't see themselves as a single species," explained Dr. Sarah Kim, the linguist who had finally cracked the complete Forerunner language. They were a collective consciousness that could inhabit different biological forms. When their civilization fell, they scattered themselves across the galaxy in every possible form, waiting for the right moment to reunite. The awakening spread like wildfire. Keltharian slaves found themselves accessing memories of mathematical concepts that revolutionized their understanding of space and time. Vortak warriors remembered ancient meditation techniques that allowed them to heal rather than harm. Even some Morvani, those who chose truth over power, discovered genetic memories of a time when their species had been artists and philosophers rather than tyrants. General Haye Jin oversaw the massive task of dismantling the military-industrial complexes that had enforced galactic oppression for centuries. But she didn't simply destroy them, she transformed them. Weapons factories became manufacturing centers for exploration ships. Military academies became schools for diplomacy and cultural exchange. Prison planets became rehabilitation centers, where former oppressors learned to live in harmony with those they had wronged. The process wasn't without its challenges. Some members of the old ruling class fought desperately to maintain their power, using whatever resources they had left to fund resistance movements and terrorist attacks. But they found themselves increasingly isolated as their own people turned against them. Emperor Vexthul made his last stand on Morthak, surrounded by the few loyalists who still believed in the old system. But when human negotiator ambassador Park So-jin offered him a choice between execution and rehabilitation, he chose to face the truth about what his civilization had become. "I spent my entire life believing we were the heroes of our own story," he said, his voice hollow with the weight of realization. "I never questioned why our history books had so many gaps, why our technology always seemed to be based on discoveries rather than innovations. We were thieves, calling ourselves kings. As Earth's blue marble spun peacefully in space, no longer threatened with evacuation, humanity took its place not as conquerors, but as the gardeners of galactic civilization. The planet that had once been dismissed as a primitive backwater was now recognized as the awakening point of a new age." Dr. Taemin stood in the restored Forerunner Command Center beneath the Pacific Ocean, watching as representatives from thousands of worlds worked together to rebuild the ancient network of cooperation and mutual aid. The technology that had been twisted into instruments of oppression was being restored to its original purpose, connecting all sapient life in harmony and understanding. The galaxy had betrayed humanity, but in that betrayal, humanity had found its true purpose. They were not meant to be soldiers or slaves, but shepherds of a garden that could nurture every form of life the universe could create. The Forerunners had returned, and the galaxy was finally free. The age of tyranny was over, and the age of unity had begun. The end